For giving my husband full custody of both of our children? I just found out that my husband of 5 years was cheating on me and getting ready to take another wife without my knowledge. I come from a Muslim household, and in Islam men can have up to 4 wives, but it isn't lawful for him to do so without the explicit consent of his first wife, and on top of that he has to be capable of giving equal love and care to all his wives. I and millions of women today don't like this law since it has no place in the modern world. It came down to us in a time of turbulence and wars to protect women the only way they could be hundreds of years ago. Many young and educated women today never consent to sharing their husbands, but it is unfortunately prevalent due to misogyny. Because we live in a mainly patriarchal world, many men abuse this law and fuck over their wives and families. In my community, many men do exactly this and marry other women without the consent of their first wife and leave them rearing children all alone with minimal or no help. I am an educated woman, young, I have a supportive family, and I truly never thought this would ever happen to me, but it did. Well, after finding out through rumors that he is taking a wife back in the homeland, his family and mine came together to talk. My in-laws had the audacity to ask me to be peaceful and not make things hard for my husband. My parents were extremely angry, especially my father, because even though my in-laws were promising that my husband would still be my husband and do all his duties, he did not believe them, and neither did I. After the in-laws tried to gaslight us by saying a wife shouldn't be spiteful and other nonsense, I laughed in their face and told them I would never ever become a single mother with a living husband, and right then and there gave my toddler to my mother-in-law and my infant son to my father-in-law. My parents looked at me with shock, but I stood up for myself and told my father in front of everyone that I have always told him that I'd rather die before I'd raise the children of a trash can of a man and have to deal with him for the rest of my life, and turned around to leave. My family and my in-laws were stunned and just looked at me as I took my purse and left. If you're wondering why it was so easy for me to give up my kids, it's because I never bonded with them properly. Both my pregnancies were extremely difficult, and I hadn't gotten over my postpartum depression from my first child. I had added stress from my newborn too, who was always crying and screaming no matter what I did. Their father was of no help and truly made my life worse by not being there for me. My heart was filled with so much hatred and anger and contempt, I swear I thought I'd lose my mind and harm my children. I was so unstable that I was afraid of being left alone with them after that terrible meeting today. That's why I gave them up. I could just picture what my life was going to look like with them in it in the future at that moment, and I didn't like what I saw. My mother called me to berate me, and my father was mostly silent and crying. I told my mother that she was lucky to have a husband like my father, and she didn't understand 1% of what I was going through. She told me to take my children back and give them to her as she would raise them. She didn't want to part with her grandkids. I asked her what was the big deal, since men do this all the time and leave their wives and children to be cared for by his in-laws. I told her I'm not going to be one of them. We started arguing, and I screamed at her that she was getting old, and in no way was I dumping 2 children on her lap like my aunt did to my grandmother, and hung up before she could get a word in. Right now, as I'm in my hotel room, my heart feels empty and I feel a distant sense of guilt, but overall like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. The reason why I'm writing this is to ask an outside perspective: is what I did right? Am I betraying my children? I truly do not want to raise 2 children all alone and become bitter for the rest of my life and deal with their father. I am contacting a lawyer to give up my full parental rights to my husband and pay child support if I have to.